you also want to consider tone and emotion. And this it kind of ties into, it sounds like a lot of what you're talking to is also like register. You
Yeah.
mentioned who you're talking, like talking to a salesman is different than talk to your mom, which is talking to someone you don't know. And once you have an idea of like the emotion of behind what you're writing, and when we say emotion, I want you to be considering like not only how does the speaker feel, but also how do you want the reader to feel? Once you have the answers to those questions, then you can go back to your piece and be like, okay, you can do some detective work. Where does that happen? So, for instance, I want the reader to feel empowered.
Mm.
What lines in my poem show empowerment? Be even more specific. What words in that line show empowerment? This also goes back to I know we already mentioned the stream from last week, but for instance, if we're just trying to find other words for, for black, well, for instance, there's a very different feel to that if instead of saying black, I say, the night we held hands the first time. That's a very different black than the bruise, my best friend gave me on my cheek. That's a very different feel.
That's your best friend. Yeah. Okay. I see. I see. I see.
So then you can kind of start going back to your poem and seeing where are the word choices that are validating the emotions that I want my reader to feel and that I want the speaker to feel. Because the reality is there really is no neutral word choice. I often think of vocab as having like an emotional pH. There's no word that's that true like 7. There's no word that true neutral. Some words are a little bit acidic, some words are a little bit basic, but everything has some sort of level to it. And so our goal is to tip the pH in a set direction, whether it's heavy in this direction for emotion or heavy in the opposite way. So really trying to have clear answers to this, because I think this is something I see a lot, especially like observational poetry, where it's just like you're just kind of reflecting on your day and things like that. And one of the issues I think those sorts of poems have is they can be very pleasant to read, but there's no clear emotional attachment. And if your reader doesn't know how to feel at the end of the poem, just like, oh, that was nice to read, but nice to read is not good enough, because it's not enough to come back to, because people aren't going to remember the specific things you say, but they will definitely remember how you made them feel. And the way, if you can charge that as much as possible, then you have the greater chance of a reader coming back to your work.
Essentially, you're walking the audience through this very specific moment. If you think about like any kind of moment in your life, like these are things that are fairly clear. It's like they're clearly defined, but it's like you're not defining them; they just are, right? And so it's kind of trying to take in account for things that you wouldn't typically go out of your way to describe, but you have to really set that scene because the audience doesn't have the benefit of being you while they're reading the poem.
Mm-hmm.